Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Veterans Voices. Tonight, we're excited to talk with several guests about myths in the veteran community surrounding the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. Many veterans believe that if you admit to mental health challenges, then the government will confiscate your firearms. We'll be right back to talk more about that. All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Nathan Johnson, host of Veterans Voices. The mission of this show is to explore the experiences of veterans, important issues that affect the community, and to connect vets and their families to supportive resources and events. If you're watching tonight and would like to share an experience or ask a question, please send us a message through Facebook at Veterans Voices 1, email at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org, or call us at 925-313-1170. Tonight, we have the privilege of displaying the shadow box of Jason Cameron on our set. When Jason was 19, while riding his bike to work in the rain, he was struck with the thought that life must be more meaningful and fulfilling than this. In this moment, Jason decided to join the Marine Corps. He became a mortarman and served with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines at the home of Lake Bandini. Jason deployed to Japan twice and to the Philippines. Today, he serves as the Monterey County Veterans Service Officer, has an extraordinary beard, and is still a proud Marine. Semper Fi, Jason. Give him one. Yeah.
Tonight's show is about exploring the question of whether the government can confiscate a veteran's firearms if they're struggling to get their mental health in order. This is a popular myth that has a stranglehold on our community. And tonight we will talk about and clear up any misconceptions about this idea and encourage veterans to seek mental health support should they need it. We have a unique guest lineup tonight to explore this topic, so let's get started. Our new host of Vet on the Street, Emily Rivas, had a chance to connect with student veterans on the campus of Diablo Valley College to explore this issue and more. Let's watch.
Hello, this is Emily Rivas Carrera with Veterans Voices, here doing a segment at DVC called Vet on the Street. Do you believe that society is afraid of veterans who have PTSD and own firearms?
I would say yes and no, but there's some people who actually have better understanding of the veterans when they get out and how the transition is so hard for them. And I think there's a lack of education for people. There's lack of media that's pointing the veterans in a wrong way instead of giving the right, aspects of veterans to the public. So I think there needs to be something, some more details about veterans, that how people can, react or act with them when they first transition or they get out from the military.
I think some are because, it can be very dangerous. PTSD is something that really affects veterans really hard. So I see why some people are nervous about it. Me personally, not really. I know we need more ways to, console, veterans and things like that. So it's a difficult issue.
Kind of depends just how bad is the PTSD, honestly. And personally, I wouldn't mind it because, what they've been through, they want to protect themselves and they have to do what they need to do.
No, I think people are more afraid of what they don't understand, and they probably don't understand or even talk about it really. So there's probably a lack of awareness about it.
So how do you feel about the Brady Act itself?
I'm all for firearms. I support firearms, but when it comes to mental illness, I would say that's a really a difficult topic. Psychology is really hard to predict. You can't really predict someone's mind or nature. People use firearms for their self-defense, but if something's wrong with the person, if they're mentally ill, and if the VA is doing something to prevent them to have weapons, there's definitely some reasons behind it.
As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to the Second Amendment, each state does have kind of the right to put their own restrictions on guns, and so if since we live in a democracy, if people want to limit or restrict firearms, that's their right to do so, but they have to vote on it.
Do you believe that seeking mental health treatment or filing a claim to increase compensation with the VA will get your weapons taken away? Have you ever heard of that myth by any chance?
Yes, I have. And I don't believe that, like, it's all true. I mean, if something's wrong with you, or rather tell the VA or my doctor, exactly what's wrong with me or how I'm feeling so they can get me better so I can get on a good treatment instead of, like, if I lie to them, nothing's wrong with them, but you're actually really sick. The main point is you want to get better, and if in that thing that you have to, give up your weapons for the time being, you get better, I mean, it is what it is.
I have heard about that. I don't really know the particularities of how that would actually affect a veteran or any person with mental health. That's something that I guess should definitely look to be looked at by not only people who own firearms, but also people who are concerned with those who participate with mental health issues. So.
Welcome back. We're now joined by veterans Bill Green and Nathan Tilton. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. Starting with you, Bill, tell us a little bit about your military service.
May of '67, I tried to enlist in the Army. They wouldn't take me. 2 months later, they drafted me. Volunteered infantry. I served in Vietnam all in 1968.
Well, we appreciate your service, sir. How about you, sir?
I enlisted in the military in 2005. I deployed to Iraq twice and Afghanistan twice.
All right, Nate and Bill, thanks for joining us. Bill, you've been on the show before, so
Yes.
Good to have you back.
Thank you.
Tonight's a very difficult topic to get started, but I think an important conversation to be had. So we just watched a video in which we went on the street and talked to veterans about their perspective in regards to seeking mental health treatment. That's the conversation we want to have tonight. And in regards to any thoughts or opinions that are held about whether that presents any type of risk of having your firearms taken away. So Bill, what is your perspective on this?
First of all, everybody that comes back should seek help, okay? And for our military. As far as taking the weapons away at this time, no. To my knowledge, there is, I suffer from PTSD. Nobody has tried to take my weapons away from me, okay? The future, though, who knows?
Something you're worried about?
Absolutely. Never trust a politician.
You mentioned that earlier. Yeah. So there's a fear about what the government may restrict if certain veterans have certain diagnoses. And
Sure.
Do you think PTSD is one of those?
At this time, it isn't, because I've bought weapons, and there's no problems with me buying weapons. Okay. Down the road, who knows?
What kind of weapons do you own, just for familiarity? Are these handguns,
Yes.
shotguns for hunting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Rifles.
Rifles. Okay.
No AK-47s, no M16s.
Right.
Okay, the only semi-automatics I have is shotguns.
Okay. Nate, what about you?
For myself, I have to agree with Bill, who I'm going to take a second to say, Bill, your mustache, beard, epic. Just, it's awesome, love it. But, I got to agree with Bill here, though, that it's one of those things where vets need to seek help, because all too often we suffer in silence, right? Culturally, veterans suffer in silence. It's what we're taught all the time. Suck it up, drive on, right? And this is no different. This is no different after we get out and we say, hey, I don't want to seem weak. I don't want to give up my guns, right? I don't want to look like I have any issues, right? And that's what predicates a lot of this, because then we go forward like myself. I have PTSD, and it took me to hit rock bottom to admit and get help, because I was afraid I would lose my job. I was afraid that I would lose my firearms. I was afraid that I would never get a firearm again.
Where do you think that fear originated from? Was this a conversation that you've had with other veterans? Is this like a case scenario that you're familiar with? Are you familiar with a veteran who had their firearms taken away by the VA? Where does this fear originate?
Nathan, that's an excellent question, because I've had to turn around and look at that, and I haven't actually met anybody that's had their firearms taken away by this. But I've heard through the grapevine, as we all have, that, oh, my buddy got his taken away, or my buddy's got his taken away, or hers taken away. But I've never actually met anybody that had their firearms taken away due to this, unless there was a 5150 charge, but that's a different issue. And so I think that leads us into why are vets not seeking help for this? And a lot of it is because it's in part ingrained in the veteran culture that we don't seek help because Bob or George or Linda told us through the grapevine they're going to come take our guns.
Do both of you seek treatment at the VA?
I'm sorry.
Do both of you seek treatment at the VA? Do you go to the VA for care?
Definitely.
Have any of the clinicians ever asked you about whether you own firearms or not?
No.
For myself, I go to the vet center. I have gone to the VA, but I found better help at the Veterans Center in Concord. And I've never really been asked that except for during an intake session of if I own firearms.
So at the vet center that you attend, have you heard the same type of rumblings that you're talking about? Like, you've heard a couple things through the grapevine, but has that been a topic of discussion ever that's come up even within the vet center that you attend?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's you hear a lot of these rumblings. In fact, I was conducting research this summer with other veterans and looking at regional culture and its impact on millennial veterans and their reintegration and health. And I was speaking to another veteran, a buddy of mine down in LA, who goes to a vet center in LA. And we're all hearing the same thing, that if you go in and you say, I have PTSD, you're going to get your guns taken. But never actually met anybody that had their guns taken. It's like the stress card myth.
Yeah.
Like, everyone hears about this stress card thing. I've never seen one. It's just this myth predicated within our culture.
What do you think is at the root of the myth? Why do you think that the connection to guns or firearms is such a stronghold that it grows to become a barrier to seeking help from the VA?
Every time you hear a mass shooting, the first thing they start talking about is gun control, getting the weapons away from people who shouldn't have them. And the first thing they start talking about is mental health. Okay? Get the guns away from the people who suffer mental health. So naturally, a veteran's going to start thinking, I've got PTSD. That comes under mental health.
Okay.
Is that my gun they're talking about?
Okay. So the association of PTSD being a mental health disorder, rather than PTSD being, to a certain extent, a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances, war, combat, the veteran sees that comes with a label. And when they see that label being associated with things in the media, then there becomes a fear. So when you see these happen, then that develops that fear for you, Bill?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How do you work yourself through that fear to then continue seeking treatment? How do you not allow that fear to disengage from?
They already know I have it. They know I have the guns. What are you going to do about it? I continue my treatment because that's where I'm comfortable. Okay.
I was going to kind of jump on that too. So with this kind of fear that's out there and knowing that, like you mentioned, every time there's a mass shooting and the link to mental health, do you also start getting a little worried each time you hear that and think that there may be something that would provoke a mental health provider that you're currently seeing to maybe re-engage with you? Hey, do you still have those weapons? Do you feel like there's a check-in with you after something like that happens?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So you're pretty comfortable, like, even if those things happen?
Very comfortable with my counselor.
How about you, sir?
I got to agree with Bill on this one, because every time a mass shooting happens, my first thought, please don't say it's a veteran. That's my first go-to thought. And it's not even trying to make fun of or make light of these tragedies. But that's my first thought, because I'm thinking about our community. Because I'm thinking, like Bill had said, the first thought goes to gun control. And whenever anything happens like that, it always goes right back to, okay, what happens? What things are they going to implement as a result of this? And so that predicates and that brings that fear back. But I've never been asked after any of these events, do you have guns? I've never been asked that again after my initial intake, not once. But I still have young veterans and young service members still serving, coming to me and asking me, since I am still serving myself, they will say, hey, I'm having a hard time. I'll advocate for them, hey, go to counseling. But I don't want to get that label of PTSD.
Yeah.
Or they'll be okay to go get different labels as long as it's physical, their knees, their backs, but not PTSD.
Right. Let's talk more about that, because I think that's an important goal of tonight's show, is to somewhat have this conversation about the fear, maybe demystify some things, but also encourage veterans to actually go out and seek help when they need it. So let's come back to that. But I just want to remind our audience that tonight's conversation is more so about the VA and seeking help, behavioral health, particularly at the VA, for any type of mental health condition, and any fear or any questions you might have in regards to whether that might lead to the VA taking your firearms away. And I want to ask our audience to participate in tonight's conversation, because you might have questions, you might have experiences, you might have comments. And this is a difficult conversation to have, particularly in a way that's very organized and thoughtful and considerate of each other's opinions. But if we could hear from you about your thoughts on the VA and their role in regards to behavioral health and firearms, we'd love to hear from you. You can call in, you can ask a question by email or over Facebook as well. And we've got actually 2 questions by Facebook. One comment here, yep, if you get treatment, you will be red flagged. So this is just a comment from one of our viewers that is concerned that by getting mental health treatment, you'll get red flagged. The second Facebook message, as a soldier, you are trained how to handle your weapon. There is no one better with that knowledge. You eat, sleep, and shave with it. No one has the right to take away that freedom we so valiantly fought for. We put this country and our subordinates first. If it wasn't for us, the VA wouldn't have a job. In my opinion, those book reading, never been deployed people, they look at veterans only as a paycheck. So some very strong opinions about the VA and about veterans and how well they're trained to handle weapons, and a very just simple perspective that, sure, you seek treatment, you get red flagged even. What's your take on that?
I know of no red flag. They may. I know of no red flag.
Okay. No counselor or psychologist has ever told you that, Bill, as a result of PTSD,
No.
I have to enter you into a system here. I have to prohibit you from certain things. Now, you gentlemen are both probably aware that the VA doesn't allow firearms on their campuses and such, right? Do they
Very
talk
aware.
about that when you go seek treatment? Is that?
Well, you're very aware of that.
You're very aware of that, okay.
I've been with the VA for almost 20 years now, so.
But other than not bringing them on the campus, you're saying you're not aware of being red flagged in any sense. Nate, that sound familiar
I'm
to
not.
you?
Are you, Nate?
You know, that, I'm telling you, someone has a time machine back here or something, because I feel like that was me 5 years ago sending those comments in.
Yeah.
Because that's how I felt before I started seeking treatment. That's how I felt. You know, it was one of those things, these are my rights, these are my guns. I'm going to be red flagged if I go in for this. That's why it took me to break down and to hit rock bottom to go and seek that help.
Yeah.
Because of that. Because I felt I was in between a rock and a hard place. You know, who can I talk to? I can't talk to anybody. And that just escalates things and just revs things up and makes it worse. And the thing is, though, is that neither of those things are true in that sense, where you're not going to be red flagged, your guns aren't going to be taken. I mean, heck, I was a federal law enforcement officer for some years before my service-connected disabilities, forced me to retire. And I was able to maintain that standing. I was able to carry my gun. I was able to work. I still have guns. I bought guns. So it doesn't red flag you in that sense.
I know that you mentioned earlier that you have a lot of interaction with some of the younger soldiers or military members that are coming in, or veterans currently that come to you often, and you can have these types of informative discussions with them. So if there was one thing you could really express, aside from there's a lot of myths around it, like what's one firm thing that you can honestly say with regards to this issue that you would tell these younger, folks that are coming in?
If anything, if I was going to tell young folks, or even a younger me, I would tell myself or these young veterans, get help.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody. Go. If you're not comfortable with the VA, go to the vet center. If you're not comfortable with the vet center, Go talk to a buddy. Talk to somebody. Call the suicide hotlines. Whatever you need to do. Call somebody. Talk to somebody. Get help. Because you are worth it at the end of the day.
Good. We actually have someone who's called in, and we're going to pick that up here in a few seconds. But we're going to have to really take this call quickly, address their question or their comment, and then end the segment. But before we take the call, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being on tonight's segment. We'll come back with more on this topic. And again, we have a caller, and I don't have any information yet. So if we don't take the call to their segment, we maybe have. Okay, so I don't have a name, but thank you for joining us on the show tonight. How can we help you?
I'm Laura.
Hi, Laura. Thank you. How do you have a question or a comment?
Hi, Nathan. It's Laura. I know you from...
Hi.
Comment. So I would say that I have no concerns or worries about anybody coming and taking my weapons or any firearms on me, even at the, wherever I go out in the public. So even though it's not allowed, if I had a firearm on me, it's usually at a shooting range, and I feel very safe there. I think the fear comes in when there's the mass shooting, like it has been mentioned, as well as it actually being a veteran out in Yountville. Was that last year, I think? And that was a great fear for many veterans and mental health workers. So I do believe, though, that seeing how the VA has come about to help veterans.
Right. Laura, thank you so much. And now hearing your voice, I think I do recognize you, Laura. So thank you for watching, and thank you for calling in and leaving your comments. And I think that what you point out is that, and you are a veteran, you didn't mention that, is that you don't have that same fear. You feel very safe around weapons, but you feel that there are certain incidents, those that actually make it into the media, that do give, for some reason, a justification to why a veteran may have this fear. And hopefully we can work past that in tonight's conversation. So thank you so much, Laura. We're going to wrap up this segment.
Welcome.
And again, are you out there with an experience, thought, or question related to tonight's topic, just like Laura? And thank you to our other Facebook questions as well. We encourage you to connect with us. We'd love to hear from you, our audience, whether you're a veteran or not. We want your participation. Call us right now at 925-313-1170. Our phone lines are open. Thank you for staying with us. We'll be right back after this short break.
Thanks for staying with us. We're now joined by Derek Butts and Skip George. Thank you, gentlemen, for both being here.
Sure. Gentlemen, just say a little bit about yourselves.
I'm Derek Butts. I'm a prosecutor, deputy DA. I've been so for 25 years. And for the last 2 years, one of my duties has been to staff the Veterans Court program in Contra Costa County. We do that once a month. And our primary mission is to apply the laws that have been enacted to assist veterans get good treatment in the criminal process if they meet their criteria.
Thanks, Derek.
I'm Skip George, and I'm a Vietnam veteran. I served in Vietnam 1967, 68, and I followed up being a career FBI agent for 25 years.
Thank you, Skip. So, gentlemen, you've both heard our first segment, and we want to, in this segment, hopefully talk from a legal perspective and an understanding of the Brady Handgun Violence Protection Act. So, a federal law that does apply to restricting the purchase, or let's just say that a person having firearms. So being that you both have a legal background, I'm hoping that we can address this act and what it does allow and what it doesn't allow. Can you give us a little bit of history of this act?
Sure. I did some research. This is federal law, and I practice mainly state, but the materials are fairly easy to come by. I noticed the Federal Firearms Act from 1938 was the first time that some laws were enacted to prohibit people from possessing, certain classes of people from possessing firearms, like felons. Made sense. Mm-hmm. The next big thing that happened was in 1968, the Gun Control Act, and that's when we first saw greater limitations, such as mental health issues being classes of people that were restricted. The Brady Act in 1993 created what's called the NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System.
Okay.
And that sought to require dealers from checking these databases that people were supposed to report to, where you had people with mental disabilities, and they would be in the database, so when you sold them a gun, something should pop up. That started in 1993. The NICS was created. And going on to 2007, the NICS Improvement Amendments Act increased the reporting to catch more people. This was in the wake of the Virginia Tech shooting, 32 people killed. And it also created mandated relief programs. So if you fell within these reporting requirements, then you also had a method to have your rights restored. And I think that's important for veterans to know, that being included and reported doesn't mean it's the end of the world. You might be able to get your rights restored.
So before we talk about how to get your rights restored, let's maybe talk about what rights are removed under this act and through this NICS system. So when we say a handgun or a firearm, what are we talking about generally? Because Bill mentioned earlier shotguns and pistols and rifles and such. Are we talking about any type of firearm? Is it, in California, certain guns are not allowed that are allowed in other states? Is it state specific, or is it just a broad restriction from any firearm?
Well, we're talking about federal restrictions. There's a whole other area of state restrictions too, and it gets complicated if there are both and they overlap. But this Brady Act is a federal system, and when you talk about what kind of firearms are included, I don't know what the federal definition of a firearm is, but I remember from years ago what the state definition, that's when a device expels a projectile through a barrel by means of an explosion. So it's general, it's basically anything that you would think a gun is.
Whether you built it or bought it. Okay.
Right.
So, Skip, do you remember in your time as a federal agent these laws that Derek referenced, and really in regards to how active agencies on the federal side would enforce these laws or would seek out someone who was prohibited from owning firearms? How did this law really affect the day-to-day citizen or the veteran?
Well, in reality, a felon cannot possess a weapon. So basically, if you're a private citizen and you have no record, then you have the right to go purchase a firearm. And basically, the only way that a federal officer would be at your house would be if you violated a federal law, or if you, like the ATF does, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, they have specific laws they enforce in violation of weapons. If you had automatic weapons or illegal weapons, that would be a case that might be involved where you would find a federal agent coming to your home, unless you violated federal laws. And if you violated federal laws and they came into your home and had a search warrant, they could seize your weapons at that point when you were being arrested. In most cases, I would think that as a private citizen, a veteran or otherwise, that you're not going to have anyone come to your house to take your weapons unless you've committed a crime, or you've threatened someone, or you've hurt someone.
Okay,
So,
given the authorities a reason to
yes,
come look for you
to
and come
be-
search
yes,
your home.
absolutely.
So we don't expect that the VA has federal agents
No.
that are out there.
No.
Well, I didn't think I was going to get people to laugh. We don't. I mean, this is a real fear. I think that people may think that the VA has federal agents that are going through a list and going door to door and searching to make sure that a veteran doesn't have a firearm if they've been added to this list. But we don't expect that that's then a realistic capability that exists.
I personally am a veteran. I have firearms in my house, legally secured. I have never heard of a case where a veteran had his firearms seized, unless he committed a criminal act, and they took him
Some
in the
other
process.
type of
Some other
acts.
type of crime.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I could add to that, the code, it's a law that says if you have been subject to an involuntary commitment due to a mental health issue, or you're deemed incompetent, like the Veterans Administration might say you are incompetent to handle your own affairs, then you fall within a class of people for whom you're prohibited from owning a gun, and the dealers who sell guns are prohibited from selling you, transferring to you a gun. But like we're talking about, it's a resource issue. You're not going to have people at your door finding just the people who fall in the categories. It's triggered by something.
Right. What if you already own a firearm and you fall into this category now? What are the options in terms of getting rid of? Are you allowed to sell this firearm to get rid of this, or what does a person do? I guess we're addressing a hypothetical situation that may not ever happen, but I guess when someone's told that they're no longer allowed to have firearms at all, what do they do to get themselves out of that situation and follow the law correctly?
Sure, I'd be happy to kind of speculate.
Okay.
And I'll analogize with the felon status. Say you're a person and you have an arsenal of guns, and then you get convicted of a felony.
Okay.
What does that mean? Get rid of your guns. It doesn't say that you can't sell them, the laws. And I don't think you become a double felon just because by virtue of your conviction they're still back in your closet. But you have to get on that and get rid of them. You might transfer them to a relative. And this is what I'm drawing on, just some examples from state cases that I've dealt with. And people are very concerned about what happens to their gun collection. Can I give them to my kids? Can I give them to my wife? Well, not if you live with her.
Yeah, right.
So it's practical.
Right. Do you think it's in a veteran's best interest to maybe seek some type of legal consultation to learn about this? Can they find enough? Derek, I mean, I know you did a lot of research. Can they find out a lot about this just on their own, say online, or do they need to get a hold of the public defender's office, or do they need to get a hold of a private attorney? What do you recommend so that veterans can somewhat demystify some misunderstandings here about this act?
Well, it's going to depend on your individual case. One website that I found very helpful is www.everycrsreport.com. And when you go to that website, they have a search. You can go to gun control, veterans benefits, and mental incompetency determinations, and that will line it out for you on how this all works. And it talks specifically about the Veterans Administration and their determinations that you might be mentally incompetent. and the due process rights that you have with respect not only to that determination of incompetency, for example, also for their decision to list you in the NICS. Those are two separate things going on. Your rights to challenge both are slightly different. You have greater due process rights for the determination that you're incompetent.
Right.
But this website will line it out for you and give you a good start. You may, if you have a close case, I would think you might need an attorney. And you say public defender. The one I'm familiar with is this, for state law. That wouldn't apply.
Okay.
They have federal ones. I called the U.S. Attorney's Office today. They don't deal with this. And so I think you're probably looking at a private attorney if you can't attack this yourself.
One more time. I'm sorry. I know you have a question. One more time. Can you give us that website again? 'Cause
Sure. www.everycrsreport.com.
Great. Thank you.
So I know you had mentioned earlier that it's not an end-all be-all in some of these cases, and there is a way for them to be able to recover if for some reason their firearms do get confiscated for issues of competency or whatever. Are you familiar, or can you kind of share maybe like something that would allow a veteran to probably get their firearms back if they did get confiscated? I know it's kind of hard depending on the actual case, but...
First of all, I don't think, from what I heard and know, that they're going to confiscate your weapons. They're going to put your name on a list. Why if you've been found to be incompetent, that you can't purchase any new weapons. It doesn't say anything about them seizing your weapons.
Okay.
So the bottom line is, unless you've committed a crime,
Right.
or as we've talked about, no one's gonna.
It may not affect anything at all.
It may not affect
Right.
anything. No one's gonna come to your house and.
But if
seize
you want that right back, if you want to challenge that legal determination, what's the recourse for that? We have about 2 minutes left to cover that.
So I go to this website, look at what you do with the VA. It's going to be a legal challenge through the VA, and if they deny you, then you have further recourse. And it is, if you're deemed incompetent, now you fall within a prohibited class, and you're technically not allowed to possess a firearm. I don't think anybody's coming over, practically, but technically you're not allowed. So you would appeal these decisions, and I came across a couple of cases, and it's possession in a private capacity. One was a police officer back east who'd been a police officer for many, many years and had one prior involuntary commitment from 30 years before, carries a gun on duty but can't have a gun at his house. He challenges through the courts and eventually was awarded or relieved of the disability. So it could eventually go up to appellate courts, this process, and he was obviously determined, and it takes probably quite a bit of effort.
So a determination by a court at any level can present that, can overturn that. Would a veteran, we're out of time here, but I would imagine part of that process might be getting the help from clinicians to support whether that veteran's competent or not. And actually the next segment we'll have on will be clinicians from the VA and former clinicians from the VA to discuss that. So gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Great legal perspective of this that hopefully helped veterans better understand that in most circumstances here, there's no one knocking on the door, and that there's actually some real help out there in terms of resources that a person could understand this a little bit better, so that this word on the street, this passing along knowledge that, oh, don't go to the VA, man, they'll take your guns away, probably is more myth than fact. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for what you do. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with VA psychiatrist Dr. Joan Coden and psychologist Dr. Shauna Springer. Let's watch this touching tribute to Lois Dean, and let's reflect on the anniversary of our own losses on September 11th.
We're back with one current and one former VA provider, Dr. Joan Coten and Dr. Shauna Springer. So let's get right into it, ladies. What do you have for us?
Well, I've been a psychiatrist in the VA for over 30 years. And one thing I've noticed is I've treated a lot of veterans. I don't think I've ever taken anyone's gun away. It's not a right that I want. And I also think it's not something that's appropriate or indicated. Our job is to keep veterans safe. And presumably someone who can own a gun has the good sense to know when they should do something else with it. Right. Or give it to somebody else. And I have a lot of veterans who come to me saying, I gave my guns to my brother-in-law. Wow. And so in a lot of years, I now have been required by the VA, when someone tells me they're suicidal, I have to ask if they have guns and if the guns are secured. And I can give them a gun lock if they don't have one. But I actually am not happy that I was told I had to do that, because I think there are probably people who asking that the first time I see them is not going to help me establish a good rapport with them.
Right. There are definitely people.
Yes.
And for 8 of those years that Dr. Coten has been at the VA, I was her coworker, and we worked a lot of cases together. And
most of whom probably owned guns, whether we knew it or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So to me, it's about the trust. I agree with you that it's about the higher order calling of healers is to hold and maintain that trust. And everything else is an illusion of control. And so if we look at, what the meaning of firearms is to veterans, which I think is something we're not aware of, that taking a firearm away in the military is a power move by someone with rank who says you're not competent to own or hold your firearm. And the consequences socially and in terms of increasing suicide risk are swift and severe when that happens. When you're alienated from the tribe of people you serve with, a core function of being a veteran is being able to protect yourself and protect your brothers and sisters in arms. And when we go into these conversations, we don't appreciate that, I think, a lot of the time as clinicians. This is a very emotionally loaded conversation. So
I'm going to take the perspective of the veteran then. Why are you asking me this question? Why am I sitting down and you're asking whether I own any firearms? Why do you need to know that?
The question is, there's a real problem of suicide in veteran populations. And one of the things that it's useful for us to know the first time is if there's a weapon there or not. And then at some point, that information is there. If we're getting a call on a suicide hotline, we know, wait, this is even more dangerous. I think a lot of veterans I see have buddies who have committed suicide.
So are you asking this question to then formulate like a safety plan? Is this like, well,
it's necessary.
If you do,
Right, it's if it's necessary.
Okay.
If somebody isn't talking about hurting themselves or hurting anybody else, I don't really need to get into that. It's when there's a reason to be concerned, I do need to ask that question. And there's a little box I have to check off. And the VA is very box sensitive.
To your point earlier, Joan, it's, it's not as though if we don't have the trust, veterans are necessarily going to feel comfortable even being frank with us about their ownership. And I had done I'd asked a former patient of mine, what do you think veterans really think when people like me ask about your ownership of firearms? And he said, I don't know, doc, but I can find out. And he went out, veteran to veteran, created a survey monkey poll. He was in Berkeley getting a degree. 70 veterans across 3 local college campuses. And half of them said that if I did not know the clinician asking the question, I would not be open and honest about my ownership of firearms. And half of them said, that's it for me. If someone asked me that question, I would be done with treatment. So the perception that we have an agenda to remove firearms becomes a real barrier to care. And to answer your question, Nathan, I mean, if I don't have trust with a veteran, to give you an example of how I might say that, I think we don't let that question sit there. We say to them, look, I imagine that you must find it odd that someone like me with relatively little experience with firearms would be asking someone like you, who has a lot of expertise with firearms, whether you own firearms. It might be like a 14-year-old questioning your license to drive a car. And then once you kind of get in there with that, you say, it's not my motivation to remove your firearms. I ask these questions because I care about my patients. And I want to have conversations about anything that affects your safety and your well-being and your family's safety and well-being. And sometimes Many of my veteran patients have had times of crisis where they have felt like their death would be a gift to the ones they love. And that is the fundamental lie that drives suicidal behavior, that your death is not a gift. It's massive collateral damage, lasting damage for your loved ones, and it increases risk for suicide for your military brothers and sisters. So given that, protecting those you love might not require anything about removing your firearms. There's creative ways to kind of handle that risk. Can we talk about those?
Yeah.
And so you've just reset the conversation with humility and cultural respect.
The years that I was a counselor helping veterans, I thought that it was an important opportunity to bring up firearms, just to invite the idea that the reason why they have these firearms is to provide safety for themselves and their family, but to raise the question of whether those firearms were presenting more of a risk in that situation. The situation being that the veteran was considering suicide, was having ideation.
When there's a lot of conflict and a lot of problems, having the weapon kind of easily accessible can be a tragedy for the veteran or for other people in their family. And I think when you start putting it in the context of, you know, there's a lot of tragedies.
So what are some quick, easy, simple ways to just take a firearm and remove it?
Take the firearm. We spend a lot of conversation on how you can have someone else's firearms or not have their firearms. I'm in a session one day with the patient that Joan and I saw years ago, and he says, "I'm not okay, doc. I'm not safe. And I trust you, and I want you to hold my firearm." And I can't, because it's a felony to even have a firearm in the VA, and we can't do this exchange or we'll both get a felony. But we had to figure out something. We sit there, and it's life and death stakes. And he says, "I could just break down my firearm and give you the firing pin." A firing pin is such a familiar thing to veterans because they have this expertise. They break their weapons down.
You can't bring a firing. You don't bring a weapon on campus, but you can bring a firing pin.
Pin's not a weapon.
A 1.5 inch, 2 inch, little tiny rod of metal without which
this, the gun can't
firearm
fire,
is inoperable. So it was a beautiful metaphor for our relationship because they're able to give me that firing pin. I can lock it in my VA when I used to work at the VA filing cabinet. And they won't ask for it back based on the trust that we have and their protective instinct to protect those they love against that outcome.
So like a growing theme that I'm seeing between you two both is the fact that, and a point that could probably be driven home is the fact that you're genuinely concerned about the personal safety of your vets that come and talk to you. And building up that rapport with them is a huge part of your practice, and not the, we're going to get you, we're going to take away, you know, different parts of your
There
rights.
isn't enough legal ability to take away, absolutely. And I think it's much more, I have had cases where, you know, veterans have been a murder-suicide or where they have fired their weapon and gotten themselves in so much more trouble that, you know, I now think doing something to keep those things from happening. And I will sometimes, depending on the situation, mention a guy where I think he did not kill his wife, but under the influence of alcohol, shot her, and it really ruined his life. You know, and it's like, this is a dangerous thing. You know it's a dangerous thing. Everybody knows it's a dangerous thing, but it's up to the veteran to keep themselves safe and for me to coach them.
I'm not above challenging my patients. I mean, I had a Marine who had a loaded firearm under his pillow every night, and he was having very vivid nightmares. And so to get him to a less risky scenario, I said, so you think somebody's going to break into your house, and if you just substituted that firearm for a K-bar, do you really think someone would get the drop on you, Marine? And he said no, and we traded the firearm out for a K-bar. So, I mean, it's about the trust. That's a higher order calling of a healer, and holding and maintaining the trust, like Joan does, like I work to do with my veterans, is everything to me.
For sure.
Well, we have a comment from our audience again over Facebook. And this says, unfortunately, I know many veterans that have been reluctant to get help from the VA for mental health. Some fear that getting help will hinder them from professional goals, such as going into law enforcement. So again, probably perspectives that align with some of the views that were shared during our first segment. which goes into, I think, the realm of how significant are things like a diagnosis in regards to their affecting employment in particular careers that require a firearm. And as we mentioned in segment 2, there is an instance in which someone can be found incompetent. What does it take to get to the threshold in which a psychiatrist or a psychologist determines someone to be incompetent? And is that something that's really being assessed for, on an everyday basis?
You have a problem with the first question in terms of like the wildfire effect. So most of the time, to answer the question about a diagnosis and an occupation, those two are not related, and people can have a diagnosis of PTS, post-traumatic stress, and still work in law enforcement. But then not everybody's on the same page. So you'll have some people in law enforcement who don't understand post-traumatic stress, who will misuse the diagnosis or fail to understand, or it gets used. I just was working with someone who is going through a court custody situation where a wife may try, or a husband, partner, may try to alienate the veteran from their child based on a diagnosis. That's a misuse of a diagnosis. So I feel like the point of the show, I hope, is to provide education, and really, as the veterans who came on in our first segment have said in the second segment, realize that there are good healers, that we base our decisions on values as healers, and we're here for you and we want you to get help.
I mean, diagnoses are not, you can't just share that. That's protected, right? I mean, a clinician diagnoses someone with PTSD, someone can't just go access that and share that to prohibit someone from.
It's protected health information. I think that it has been a problem. I have had veterans who had interviewed for jobs with police departments, and I think a pretty unreasonable evaluation by a psychologist who was just really, I think, but he ended up getting hired by a different police department that I think had a bit more of an understanding. Somebody who's been through treatment and come out better is a much better person. And the problems they have on their forces with suicides and substance abuse, the kind of dangerous things when you don't let people get treatment. I think they're more alert to this now with airline pilots. Saying if you get treated for depression, you've lost your career is a deal breaker. And I think a lot more people are getting better at understanding that. I think those risks are pretty rare. There's not many reasons your diagnosis would get out publicly.
But sometimes people have to sign waivers to have their medical records accessed, as in the case of the Veterans Benefit Administration. So they have signed the rights for somebody to access their records, and so part of it is educating yourself on what you're signing for.
What information you're actually sharing out there.
And also when I've had these cases with unfair accusations that people aren't safe with their children, I mean, I think we've just written evaluations and said, here, this is why I believe that this person is safe and responsible, and that, even if certain incidents happened years ago, I mean, this really comes up not just with child custody. I've had physicians with their medical licenses, law enforcement, and by and large, the workplace can't arbitrarily be as rejecting as it used to be.
So to wrap this up, because we're unfortunately out of time, what would be the last thing that you would say to a veteran who is considering whether or not they should seek treatment out of a fear of potentially losing their guns?
The wildfire issue is that if you ever hear about it happening to a person, and sometimes, as the guest in the first episode segment said, it's just sort of the rumors that this could happen. It's a scary thing. It feels very risky. But when you weigh the pros and cons of suffering in silence versus getting help and taking that tiny risk, to me, it's a matter of really having the courage to get the help you need.
Right.
Things like the legal things that bring you to the attention of law enforcement are really, really rare. A veteran coming in, having trouble, asking to get help, we're not even dealing with that at the beginning. It's trying to find out what's bothering you, what's going on, what kind of help do you need.
How can we help you get better?
How can we help you get better?
Possibly stay out of the justice system.
And, that a lot of those other things really come up very, very rarely. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can say, well, I wrote a letter for and it's like, yeah, but I remember those pretty clearly because I have not written that many letters for child custody or for law enforcement or for doctors to keep the license. It's like one every 10 years, maybe.
Well, Dr. Cohen, Dr. Springer, thank you so much. Wish we could talk more about this, but this has been a great show, great topic, and we'll do more of this. This is part 1, folks. So we're ready for you part 2 next month, but thank you for tuning into the show tonight. We've had a meaningful conversation with our panel, and we hope that you've enjoyed it. Before we go, we'd like to share a few events and resources in the community. The Contra Costa County Bar Association offers support in matters of the law, the legal community, and the judicial system. They serve thousands of professionals and members of the public every year. Visit ccba.org to learn more. Vet centers offer readjustment counseling in order to support a successful transition from the military to civilian life or after a traumatic event experienced in the military. Individual, group, marriage, and family counseling are offered in addition to referral to connection to other VA or community benefits and services. Call the Concord Vet Center to learn more at 925-680-4526. Mental health services at the VA Northern California Healthcare System provides treatment and consultation for a variety of issues that can impact emotional well-being. All services are recovery-oriented. To learn more, visit northerncalifornia.va.gov. To rewatch tonight's episode, check back on our homepage later this week or check your cable provider's schedule for rebroadcast times. You can also rewatch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel. Subscribe at Veterans Voices of Contra Costa. Our next live broadcast will be Monday, October 21st at 7 p.m., and it'll be part 2 of this conversation, this very important conversation that we started tonight. We'll focus on the veterans' perspective on the Second Amendment. So be sure to tune in. We want your voice. This is Veterans Voices of Contra Costa County signing off, wishing you all a relaxing evening. And for the veterans out there, hoo-yah, hoo-ah, and semper fi.